This is KLEAN Radio.
Welcome everybody out there listening to KLEAN Radio, and let's welcome Portland, Oregon, FM News 101 KXL. Let's hope it goes through tonight, Portland, and you don't just hear us for 2 minutes. Let's welcome everybody out there listening to KLEAN Radio. I'm here with my co-host with the most, the lovely and dear Andrew Spanswick.
And I'm here with Judah Friedman, of course.
And who's been in the industry for about 48 years.
Yeah,
he's prenatal.
Why do you have to keep doubling it like I'm that old?
No, he's actually a very young 68. And, so I'd like to welcome everybody out there. There's a show about addiction and recovery and everything sort of in the middle. We talk about people that are struggling, and I'd love to hear, Andrew, from at the end of last week's show, we had a caller named George. I believe he was calling from Englewood, and one of the things he was struggling with sort of about what is alcoholism, and he was questioning, is he an alcoholic? And I would love to hear from him. We gave him a challenge if he could stay sober for a week, and
if not, to report
and if
what
not,
happened.
And that's one of the things about this show too, is Andrew, who owns and operates KLEAN Treatment Center, and one of the things we don't like, and we're not tough love people. We're not these people that want to beat people up if they, and I got to say, I was talking with a client today who is back and who came back to treatment, and the ease and comfort that he had in coming back, it really made me happy, because it showed me, Andrew, that like we treat people well, that we're not judging.
Well, I think, that's exactly it. And also, somebody has to be there for people. And we know that this is a disease that has a lot of relapse and recidivism. So what would be the point in alienating people from getting help and feeling comfortable and coming back? And as I've said for a long time, is that, successfully becoming sober, no matter what type of addiction you have, maybe, if you relapse, the idea is to shorten that period of relapse to as small as possible, recognizing that that might be a natural occurrence within this, long-term chronic illness. And so if you can mitigate or reduce the symptoms of someone relapsing by getting them back into treatment quicker, and not having them stay out for a couple of years and do a lot of damage, that's great for both the client and society in general, really.
So, George, if you're out there, or anybody else out there that's struggling right now with wondering what alcoholism is or addiction is, if they have a problem with it, give us a call. The number is 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222. We have probably one of the best shows I think we're going to have, and I'm really excited about it. I hope the guests don't let me down, but we have Dr. Phil.
It's already bribed them.
Dr. Phil in the studio tonight. That's Dr. Phil Hemphill. And that's a really cool name. And he's a PhD overview. I'm reading this really
You
bad.
can't read this stuff?
And
Come on, Judah, you're better than this.
I'm going to give you, this guy is an awesome guy. I met him before the show. He's Director of Behavior Therapy and Research at River Oaks Hospital. He's gone to Tulane with Andrew.
Yes, we are actually alumni brothers.
Which is pretty amazing, because Tulane is known as a school for heavy Drinking, yeah.
Let's be honest about it. Phil and I drank a lot in grad school.
And his book is called Taming Disruptive Behavior. And we also have another amazing guest in the studio tonight. His name is Dan Griffin. He's an author. He's really a book I encourage everybody out there. I encourage both of your books to be bought. But it's called A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps and Helping Men Recover. And let's welcome you both to KLEAN Radio.
Thank you.
And one of the things I want to tell everybody out there that's listening is that if you have any questions, I'm pretty sure everybody in our studio tonight can answer those questions.
Between the three of us,
between the three of you guys, and not me, between the three of you guys, I'm pretty sure you guys can answer almost any question about addiction or what's not addiction. So give us a call. The number here at KLEAN Radio is 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about addiction a little bit, because I still think, we were talking about this before the show, and I ask this to all three of you. Why are people still so confused about what addiction is? What is it? Let's not all at the same time, guys.
Well, I think there's a lot of issues that we were talking about before the show.
Yeah.
And what I think is really interesting about our group tonight is that we have a lot of complex issues that we're dealing with, not just like what is addiction,
Right.
but also what are all these different roles within addiction. And we're fortunate enough tonight to have people that understand issues of gender and sexuality and the complications of those within alcoholism and other process addictions,
Yeah.
as well as sex and love addiction itself. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about gender identity, and how it plays a role in addiction. So I think tonight's going to be very enlightening. Dan, maybe you can kind of lead us off a little bit and just tell us a little bit about what you've done and kind of your general sort of thesis of the day on what you think about addiction and men's roles specifically in addiction.
Sure. Well, okay, so the first thing I think is, this whole thing about addiction and why is it still confused. I mean, there's so many things that you can say about that. You talked about it being a chronic illness, and yet we still don't treat it as a chronic illness, so we're still not viewing it that way. There's still an inordinate amount of lack of resources that have been put to actually treating it and educating people about it. So then we finally get people in to the services, and then we still have services that are set up as treating an acute disorder. I mean, so you could parse this out in many different ways, but I guess where I'm looking at is that when we do get men into the program, the question is, are we providing the best services for men? Are we doing men a service by providing them the services that we basically have been providing since we created the field?
The role of gender in alcoholism has been very strange, because originally the big book was all about late-stage male alcoholics.
Right.
In fact, women had a hard time getting into the idea of being treated for alcoholism. And now we sort of see a change as women have been able to sort of express their feelings and get treatment. There's been less stigmatization of mental illness in general with the advent of new medications. Now men are being sort of left behind. And in a new way. Philip, I know you have done a lot of work in this field, going back to our grad school days when you started working with sexual predators. Maybe you just give us kind of a brief overview of how you got into this field and what you've been doing for the last, not 46 years, about 22, I think.
Right. That's just you're covering your own butt. It's okay.
I had to bring in a witness.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Judah. He cited some of the earliest work that I did with, working at River Oaks Hospital, and I've moved on from there. And, when you think about addiction, this continuum here, there's so much mental health issue that are out there as well. So, to sort of say it's just an addiction, I think minimizes the reality of what the problems are with people and the complexity of what we see.
You know what? I just had a discussion last night with a psychiatrist, Dr. Ko, that works with us, and I said to him, "Why is it that people keep separating addiction and mental health?" And he goes, "I don't know. DSM-5 has addiction listed in it. It is a mental health disorder." So,
and the wave of the future in medicine is going to be integrating behavioral health. Because we know that a good 60% of people who end up in med-surg have some comorbid behavioral health issue or some addictive co-occurring disorder. So the future...
what does that mean to the average person out there? Because that's a lot of big words. You and your PhD.
Yeah, I have a lot of PHs, in my names there. All three of my names.
You do, actually. You have
Phil,
three of them.
PH.
Philip Hemphill, PhD. That's quite the...
PH.
He's got 3 PHs.
Well, if I could, jump in. I mean, one of the things I think that's really necessary for the field to begin taking a look at. I mean, we've got addiction, we've got mental health, and we've got this behavioral health platform model that's coming out. And we've had that happen before, about 25 years ago. And what happened is that addiction got subsumed into mental health and behavioral health, and basically got, began to be treated as a secondary issue. I don't think that's the answer, but I think the big missing piece, and I think this is something that you deal a lot with too, Phil, is this whole idea of trauma. Because when you begin to see trauma and you begin to look at trauma as its own constellation of factors and something that helps to exacerbate or precipitate an addiction, as well as to impede a person's recovery, you begin to see it in its totality and see how huge it is. You get to see the impact of it. But the other thing is that from the years I've been studying trauma and learning more about it, I've kind of been unlearning everything I had learned about mental health. And what I'm coming to see, I think it's John Briere who studies trauma. He said if we treated trauma in all the ways that it shows up in the clients that we have, the DSM would be a pamphlet. That's a profound statement about how invisible trauma has been.
I mean, you have
people
to
that
remember
just tuned in, what is the DSM? So people,
it's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual.
Because I know all
version
three of you
5.
guys know exactly
It was actually
what it is.
a
It's just
book,
been revised.
It was a book that was really created to identify and talk about classes of mental illnesses, so that there would be communications between researchers and, more importantly, in some ways, billing with insurance and a structuring of programming for doctors. So from that, there was also the ICD-9 codes, which then was
it got co-opted now, and it's become it used to be a way of trying to manage a person's behavior. Now it's become a way to define the person.
Right. And the original DSM, the DSM-2 even, was a narrative. It was a book.
Right.
And now it's really like a checklist book.
And by the way, if you just tuned
It's
in,
funded by...
if you just tuned in, you're
funded by
listening
the
to
wrong
Clean
people.
Radio. We're in the studio tonight with two amazing guests, Dan Griffin, author of the book A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, and also Dr. Phil Hemphill, PhD, who's currently a director at Pine Grove Behavioral Health and Addiction Services, and also wrote the book Taming Disruptive Behavior. So give us a call. The number is 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222. Here's the night, by the way, if you're listening or you're out there, I'm almost could say this honestly, almost all your questions can get answered. And so I encourage everybody to call. We're here with Dr. Phil, author Dan Griffin, and of course the great Andrew Spanswick.
Oh, well, thank you,
And
Gina.
let's welcome Portland, our brand new station. And we're talking about all these different things. And I think this is, again, we have three pros in the room. We have three guys that have studied the business. And, you know, to the layman out there, you know, to the person out there that's listening, we're talking
It's
about
actually a field, not a business.
a business.
It's a business as well, I suppose.
But let's go right away. Let's go right. You guys. This is what I'm up against, people, tonight. I'm up against three intellectuals, okay? Two Tulane graduates and somebody from Minnesota. Where did you graduate from? I'm scared to ask.
James Madison and the University of Kansas.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah,
And,
so, you know, I'm kind of slumming it.
actually, Tulane. You know, come on, let's be real.
I apologize to any Jayhawks out there that may have been insulted by that comment.
Let's go right away. We have John in. I think this is John in either in Louisiana or L.A. Welcome to Clean Radio, John.
Thank you. Los Angeles.
Los Angeles.
there you
Okay.
Yeah. I guess my comment was what sparked me to call was the idea that AA or the Big Book or the 12 Steps is something that can't address people who are not white middle-aged men.
That's a
don't
great
think-
question.
I guess I don't think it's gender specific. I think it addresses
I don't think
real
the comment
problem.
was. I don't think I said that it couldn't. I said what it was originally created. It was originally created by a group of late-stage male alcoholics.
Yes,
The
that's right.
stories have evolved. There was the second set of stories that was amended in the second, I think the second edition or third edition. They amended the stories. They changed out all the stories to include some stories of women, but
And different faiths.
right. But
and
And then
one
the
thing-
fourth edition.
and then the fourth edition really made a big difference. But the main thing that I think is important that I have an issue with 12 Steps is it doesn't constitute the full realm of treatment. In fact, it isn't really treatment per se. It's really a self-help group to help people who have an illness, and that what is offered out there is much more substantial now with advents of new medical models and new social models as well that are much more complex and can deal with a whole breadth of issues deeply involved in mental health, and then also, especially what Dan and Philip are talking about tonight, issues with gender identity and sexual identity and all sorts of new roles that are occurring within our society. Just saying men or women are now is just not enough to define the variety of issues and problems that we deal with different genders.
But that they could also merge together. That the medical practice and the 12 steps do work together.
Beautifully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully.
My wife actually spent some time at River Oaks in New Orleans on her way to another program in Florida called The Refuge, where they do deal with underlying trauma as well as addiction problems. and she has a severe brain injury. And so now she has a lot of sobriety just from attending AA. And I'm not a person who thinks that that's the only. I agree it's not treatment, but I disagree that it's self-help. In fact, it says very clearly that it's not self-help.
No, it's a social model. It's absolutely
it's
a social model that it's really based a lot, I think, and mirrors DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. So I think, there's definitely a component there where it educates people about their illness, and then it uses sponsors and other social support to guide people and engage them and keep them hopefully sober.
Well, that's an interesting interpretation. However, the book states that it is a spiritual path, that the problem is not alcoholism or sex addiction or drug addiction. That's the wrong solution to the problem, which is lack of conscious contact with a higher power as the addict understands it.
I agree with you, but I really think that it all sort of goes together. And I think that, it's unfortunate that there's been this divide between medical model people, social model people, AA people. The truth of the matter is everybody's working for the same goal, which is to get people sober and get people better. So, and I really do think they all work together. What works, works.
Yeah.
You know?
And John, that's actually, just so you know, we're actually big advocates. I got sober in the 12 steps. And one of the whole goals of this show was to open up this dialogue, because I know a lot of people that weren't getting better because they were scared of, going to see a psychiatrist,
or being told not to,
or being told not to.
I was going to AA too. Yeah, it's intimidating.
John,
if you're a woman, going to a group and it's just a bunch of men.
Right. We were actually talking about that before the show, and that's a big thing that Dan Griffin is, and Andrew were actually talking about this before the show, about there are a lot of men, and it could be a little scary for women, and the sexual predation that goes. Thank you, Andrew. You guys all went to college. And so, John, here's the thing, and I love that you're calling in, because this is how we have to do it. We have to have this dialogue.
Yeah, it's time for things to be re-examined and looked at, and take the best of all that's going out there. I mean, we're working off models that are largely 50-plus years old, and addiction is the treatment of addiction, the understanding of addiction, and gender identities, and just how society will work going forward is something that we're re-examining and experimenting with constantly.
Well, and let me, say, John, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I think there's a difference between the 12 steps and how the 12 steps have been interpreted and how they've been actually operationalized or put into practice.
Very similar to this thing called the Bible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I have yet to meet a person or a culture where the 12 steps have not been beneficial. When you go to recovery celebrations, especially international ones, you see the international language that this speaks to. I think one of the challenges is that it's a human organization. These are human organizations. And one of the things that I say, I mean, your wife went to the refuge, so you understand trauma as a significant factor. And one of my sayings is, we are a traumatized field working with traumatized clients, and we send them to a traumatized recovery community. So the truth is that if we begin to truly deal with the trauma that is, decimating people in recovery, let alone the people working with them, we're going to see a complete change in the functionality of those meetings. And,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry,
Doctor.
The interpretation of the 12 steps is, if we try to insert too much of our egos and ourself into that, it's easy to miss the point.
And that never happens.
Never happened to me, ever.
Yeah, Dr. Phil wanted to say something.
Yeah, John, I think that your life experience in this is a true picture of how this has to be integrated. I mean, you're dealing with a brain disorder, you're dealing with trauma, you're dealing with the 12 steps, and you've been able to gain all of this insight and wisdom through the support of that 12-step program.
You're right, an amazing perspective he has.
Yeah, and to be able to sort of take your position initially, I thought you were going to just sort of stand on it with this one modality and one approach, but I think your life experience with all of this with your wife has really been a nice example of the need to bring in all of these other specialties to have a successful experience.
Absolutely.
John, we got to run. I just want to say thank you very much for the call.
You're
Give us a
welcome.
call back and just keep us in the loop. We'd love to hear how your wife's doing, okay?
Great program. Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
thanks a lot.
John.
Thanks.
And if you just tuned in, you are listening to KLEAN Radio. That was John calling from Los Angeles. We're in the studio tonight with perhaps 3 of the smartest men in the greater Los Angeles area right now, and I'm not including myself. Dr. Phil Hemphill.
But otherwise, there might have been a fight.
Author of Taming Disruptive Behavior. Dan Griffin, author of A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps, and pretty much you guys are, one of the things I find very interesting about John's, the last call we had, was that there really is this fight that's going on, but there's people are going to the other side. Guys like John, who through personal experience has decided to say 12 steps are great and I love it, but there's also more to it.
Yeah, I think, everything's becoming more sophisticated. Phil, you've been doing a lot of research, right? I mean, and you've come from a very strange background. When I first met you, I was like, really? You're going to work with sexual predators? And one of the things we were talking about back in the green room before the show was, the perpetrator and the perpetrator's side, and that because there's like a lack of willingness for society to look at that or deal with those issues, we don't really have much insight often into what creates trauma or why trauma happens or how to stop it. What's happened in your career that you've sort of come to conclusions about?
I think the idea of just, we put a lot of investment in treating the victims and having services available for them and the families, and oftentimes as a way of preventing the ultimate perpetuation of this type of behavior, that you need to really go to the source.
I mean, there's a real statistical tie between alcoholism and like incest and sexual abuse, right?
Yeah, there's a substantial amount of substance abuse and use.
And the psych hospitals I used to work in before I got into more recovery side, I don't think I had a single sexual offender that wasn't also a substance abuser.
Right, and it's important though to recognize that doesn't go the other way around, or I think your phone lines will light up.
Yeah, right. I think they'll light up in here. And Dan, but that goes also to your book and what you're talking about. You're very big on with the man. You tell it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what Phil is saying. I mean, here's the thing. You can't talk about men's issues in recovery and not get into the idea about perpetration and abuse and violence. One, men, more so than women, tend to externalize the effects of trauma, which means we tend to act out. Now, the challenge is that our field has a really hard time acknowledging the fact that you can actually talk about men's trauma and about abusive behavior or the complexity of intimate partner violence and not be excusing the behavior. And that's one of the things we were talking about. So what I always say is that we really need to find a model that brings compassion and accountability together.
Okay, we got to run to a break, but one of the things I want to talk about, we'll get to Heather after the break. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was, because I've noticed a lot of people that can't get sober, a lot of men that can't get sober have certain sexual issues, whether they can't come to grips with the fact of being gay or they were molested. And I want to know if there is a correlation. We'll get to that after the break. We have an amazing show. Author Dan Griffin, author Dr. Phil Hemphill, PhD, and has worked in 1,000 places. The discussion continues at KLEAN Radio.
Are you or someone you care about addicted to drugs or alcohol? Addiction ruins lives and destroys families. Bring an end to the pain and suffering by calling KLEAN Treatment Centers. KLEAN has helped people from around the world break free by not only treating the addiction, but the underlying causes and providing vital aftercare so people can get clean and stay clean with no gimmicks and no false promises. If you need immediate assistance or just have questions, call KLEAN Treatment Centers for guidance. A much better life awaits.
Welcome back to KLEAN Radio. And if you're wondering what addiction is tonight or anything like that, no need to Google, because we got Google in the studio. And,
we have Jugal as well.
We have Jugal. And
you don't necessarily get the right answer, but you get an answer.
You get an answer, and eventually it might be right. We have Dr. Phil Hemphill, PhD. He's the consulting/director at Pine Grove Behavioral Health and Addiction Services. He has a book out called Taming Disruptive Behavior. We have Dan Griffin.
Dr. Dan.
Yes, Dr. Dan. And Dr. Dan and Dr. Phil. And author of the book, A Man's Way Through the 12 Steps and Helping Men Recover. And we have Andrew Spanswick, of course.
Lucky co-host.
Yeah, my co-host with the most host. And we have an amazing show going on tonight. And before the break, we're going to get to Heather in a second. Before the break, I've noticed this, and a lot of people I've seen that have a hard time staying sober. And I'm going to go to both of you on this because both of you seem to be in agreement with a lot of these issues. I've noticed a lot of guys that have a hard time staying sober have sexual trauma issues. Either they can't admit they have a hard time dealing with the molestation that happened, or they can't come to terms with their sexuality.
Well, one of the things that you have to do in addition to just the substance issue, and it could be an abuse or it could be a dependency issue, is you really have to understand what function is this serving in a person's life. And you have to go back and sort of look at what are the reinforcers? What is this person's life like with the use of this? Not taking away the disease concept at all, but still recognizing that it's playing a role in a person's life. So the integration of sexuality or relationships, definitely relationships, is truly impacted with regards to the recovery process. So as a person begins to sort of abstain from the substances or sexual or whatever, the gambling or work, there's all these other process addictions going on, then often the idea of, now what do I have? It's a very lonely place out there sometimes for people. And the idea that there's a need to turn sometimes or switch to another addictive process, so the vulnerability is high there, but also to gain some control back over their lives. And sexuality is a nice way to get that.
Right.
Even just, a masturbatory pattern or masturbatory fantasies that start to drift in a person's life. So there's a lot of ways that sexuality can fulfill some of those needs for control and power.
It also works on the same system, right? It's all in the dopamine system. So, we've got some replacement of dopamine that you're getting from drug use with, sexual behavior.
Yeah. So I totally agree again with what Phil is saying.
And we wanted controversy on this show. Andrew and I have been discussing the weight of the ratings is controversy.
I'll offer a slightly different perspective because I agree with what he's.
What the hell was that?
He wants us to fight.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, that's fine. I'll take it off. Let's go.
Hey now.
So,
different show.
The different perspective or additional perspective, I think, is really, the book that I'm working on now, I'm getting ready to finish. I interviewed men with 10 plus years of recovery about relationships. What have been the most significant aspects of creating healthy relationships or the challenges in creating healthy relationships? Every man talked about sex. Every man talked about sexuality. And one of the men even said, this is a guy with 28 years, Roland, he said, I think it's the number one issue that causes relapse in the recovery community.
I think it's actually one of the number one reasons it causes addiction in the first place.
That's what I mean. It's like a very complex interaction. I think the challenge is that, sex overlaps with our ideas of love, intimacy, vulnerability, and it gets conflated. And one of the kind of concepts that I use in the work that I do, and I can only anticipate the reaction this is going to get, but we call it the sex funnel. And so that, like I said, but the idea is
I just trademarked that, by the way.
The idea is that, men have all of these natural human emotions and experiences: affection, attraction, love, closeness, intimacy, but they tend to come into our psyche and our experience through a funnel that channels it all out as sex. And so it gets very confused. You don't have to have sexual trauma to be confused as a man sexually. You don't have to have sexual trauma in order to be afraid of intimacy and closeness because you're not exactly sure how to separate it.
I really love that point because so many people think you've got to be like so screwed up or you have to have an identified problem to then therefore have addiction, not realizing that just life is traumatic.
Well, just the idea of what we are considering normal today. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey has taken on a life of its own.
Right.
And the idea that somehow men have to live up to this standard.
I haven't read the book. So.
I haven't either, but
I'm still going by the old standard.
You guys are too scared of it. That's
By the way, if you just tuned in, you are listening to KLEAN Radio.
Take a call.
Give us a call at 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222. Let's go to Heather, who's actually got a very interesting question. Heather in Vermont, welcome back to KLEAN Radio. Heather, how are you?
I'm I'm doing good. Good to hear your voice again. I missed you the last couple of weeks while I was on vacation.
Missed you too, but you're lying. But I did miss you, Heather. But one of the things I want to just so you guys both know, Heather's sober quite a while. You had just had 15 years, so happy birthday, Heather.
Yeah, congratulations.
And she was about to get divorced, but she spoke to the love doctor, Andrew. And now she's not getting divorced anymore, right? That's the last update.
Yeah, our last update is we're separated, but we're postponing divorce and hoping to reconcile sometime in the future.
And is he sober? I don't remember.
Well, that's part of the reason why I was going to be asking Dan Griffin the question that I had.
Okay.
Well, go ahead. Answer the question.
Would your book be, useful for spouses of alcoholics to help figure out how to help them?
Absolutely. I mean, here's the interesting thing, Heather, is that the book was written for men in recovery, but it's being used. One of the reasons because there's not a lot out there for men, but it's being used. I had a friend who read it who's not even in recovery. He said this book seems to be more about being a book about being in recovery from being a man than just being an alcoholic, because of the way that it deconstructs the masculine experience and overlays it with the 12-step experience. So I think absolutely it would be helpful, to understand just how men have our external worlds and our internal worlds and the conflict that we have, and being able to bring them together and really express our internal world in a way that makes sense and also validates our experience. Does that help?
Yeah, because the reason I was asking is, for the course of our marriage, my husband's been a sober alcoholic, but he never went into treatment and wasn't in AA or anything. And in the last week and a half, he actually started going to AA. And I was excited about that. And he told me that he wanted to be honest with me and that he'd been drinking on and off from May until September. So September 1st.
It was a romance.
Sober since then.
May, September. Never mind. Too smart for you guys. Sorry.
Well, I think as somebody just kind of transitioning into the 12-step process, and especially kind of given some of the history that you all have, I think this could be actually really helpful for him to help him conceptually more easily kind of move in to the experience that, obviously is different. It's different that a lot of men experience. And if you guys have been having some challenges, the intimacy that he's going to experience and some of the interaction that he's going to have, not just with men, but with women, is going to be confusing, and it's actually going to bring up a lot of stuff that we don't always prepare men for. That's part of why I wrote the book. So my hope is that it actually would be helpful for him in that.
And Heather, I was just going to say, because Dr. Phil's book is called Taming Disruptive Behavior, and how would your book also?
Well, I don't know. I don't necessarily want to speak to that as much as the idea of just the issue of having to withhold from you, Heather. The idea that he's been sporadically drinking and not being honest. Could be an example of this threat to his masculinity in the moment, or it could be a fear of your relationship and how you'll respond to something like this. So sometimes, I think. More needs to be delved into with regards to this issue. And, books help. And, as an author myself, I'm hopeful people read. But at the same time, there's a barrier there. And, I think having a more frank, responsible, accountable conversation about the process and how this came out would be, advantageous, and I really applaud you calling in and talking about that.
I also think it's important that Heather gets help. When we originally had the conversation, Heather, it was about even whether you stay together or whether you get divorced. Yeah. It's still important to get some sort of therapeutic help, even if you get divorced.
Absolutely.
Guiding through that process of dealing with the truth, dealing with what really happened, getting closure or getting acceptance, and then forming some sort of healthy relationship or new foundation from which to start from, while incorporating all the experiences of the past. I do think that, we have a very black and white culture now where people say, either I love someone or I hate them. And life is much more complex than that. And people are much more complex than that. And a real relationship takes a lot of give and take, takes a lot of understanding, and a lot of a creation of this thing that we do call intimacy, which is not always a pleasurable thing. I think people often mistake intimacy with like sex. And intimacy is not sex. You can have intimacy during sex, but it's not necessarily the same thing. Maybe, Phil, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the difference between sex and intimacy is.
Before you do, by the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to KLEAN Radio. Give us a call, 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222. We're on the phone with Heather from Vermont. And we're also in the studio tonight with Dr. Phil Hemphill and the author Dan Griffin. Why don't you answer Heather's further questions?
Yeah. Intimacy, takes on many different faces. You have the idea of spending time together and being connected and being present for each other, not just having presenteeism where you're sitting there in the same room but you're not really connected. So that's a part of intimacy. Having a recreational intimacy, which is having a public relationship that mirrors your private relationship, and recognizing that you can't be one way in private and treat someone differently out in public. So,
well, it's kind of a challenge now anyway because we're living in different states. So when I called originally before the separation divorce thing came up, he's in Pennsylvania and I'm in Vermont. So our conversations are basically on the phone, but we've had some very good, conversations because, one thing, he's going to 4 AA meetings a week, and so I talk, what did you talk about, or what did you get
stay out of that, Heather. That's, just a little bit of advice. Let him go to his meetings and, let him have his own recovery.
Well, and one of the things that I was going to say, because, two things. On the intimacy thing, again, totally agree. We did the research for helping men recover, and we discovered that there was a book written by a husband and wife, 1970s. It's out of print, but they discovered 12 types of intimacy, 12 forms of intimacy, and I'm sure other people have done it too, but it was really eye-opening for us to see intimacy in such a broad thing. That's part of what we work with men around is actually identifying relationships that are in all those areas so that they see how intimate their lives are. But the other thing is that I'm going to be a little controversial because with what Phil was saying, I would say, there is a need for a frank conversation and there is a need to do that, but I would not do it right away. I think what needs to happen is I think your husband needs some time. Your husband needs some time to get acclimated, and he needs to be able to find the tools to begin to open in a different way, because obviously there's been a lack of communication. Obviously there's been a breakdown in intimacy and connection. So reconnecting that is going to be a delicate process.
It's strange.
To just call him on the carpet for his drinking.
I totally agree with you, but we live in a society now where communication is almost demanded instantaneously through social media, through cell phones. There is no downtime. It's like for most people, we're always online. We're always engaged. We're expected to always pick up the phone.
Well, good luck staying married if you're going to approach it that way.
I would like to ask the three of you a question.
Yeah, but how do we deal with that as a society?
But you could hear it in Heather's comments about their states apart right now.
Right.
And so her way of attempting to connect with her husband is to try to, be his monitor and tell me what you're doing in these meetings, which means that's an intimate time for you.
Well, no,
and I'd like to know about that.
What I meant was, what did they talk about? What was the meeting?
Right, but again, Heather,
Wait, let's let Heather speak. Heather, what was your point?
Yeah.
Well, because he's like, we talked about, whatever whatever the subject of the meeting was. And, and so when we do that, I'm like, and, I talk about, my understanding of it, and then he talks about what he got out of it, and, he talks about being overwhelmed, and I tell him, hey, take it easy, you don't have to do everything at once.
Yeah, it sounds like
in the 80s it was codependence, right? Everything was codependence no more. It was all about you were codependent. Everybody's kind of forgotten about that term. Now we're talking about trauma and intimacy. What really is going on? What's going? What should people really be focusing on as in trying to make relationships work?
Well, I think using the experiences that we have day to day as a platform for trying to connect with another person, listening to them, practicing listening, being a discerning reviewer, giving feedback when you really want to say something directly to the person, going along, taking turns leading. So, Heather in this case is connecting with some real core vulnerable topics through the disclosure and experience that she's having as well as he's having. And it's a good beginning. You know, it's trying to, it's sort of putting your toe in the water to sort of start talking on a more emotional level, to me, is what I hear them doing. And she feels a little bit of distance still. I have to say that, despite the, you know, the idea that we're close to each other,
right,
with all the technology.
Well, that's sort of my point, is it's kind of
together?
artificial, like social media and the telephone are artificial forms of intimacy.
Heather, how often are you guys speaking to each other?
Not every day, maybe every other day. There was 3 days that we didn't talk, but
Right.
you know, and I'm actually going to be seeing him in a couple weeks on Columbus Day weekend. I'm actually going to be getting together with him and visiting at an event together.
Okay, well, Heather, listen, as a person that's been in the 12-step world for a long time, one of the best things I could suggest to you is let him have his program and you have your program. And you start checking out Al-Anon meetings and really
I did go to one.
Good. And getting
went to one.
and getting help for yourself, because the reason I say that is because my girlfriend's not in the 12-step world, and it's honestly it's a blessing.
Amazing he has a girlfriend.
It's amazing I have a girlfriend for as long as I've had. But one of the great things one of the things I've noticed, Dan, and you could talk about this a little bit, is that sometimes when people date in AA or date, that's a big topic of all they talk about. Sometimes. And one of the things I enjoy going home after I leave work or after I do this stuff is that I don't necessarily have to talk about this.
Yeah.
And I think it can get a little confusing for people.
Well, so I think there's several things going on. I totally agree with the Al-Anon piece. I think the other thing is that, you know, I would offer just a slight shift. Rather than saying, what did you talk about? Just saying, how's it going?
Yeah.
You know, what was it like for you? Because the experience is different than the content. And that makes, I think, a bit of a difference. I understand that you're concerned. I understand that you're wanting to see how he's doing, especially in light of the fact that he said he's drinking. But the rupture that's happened in your relationship is going to take time. The fact that you're separated, the fact that all this, it's going to take time to rebuild. And so my hope for you all is that you all just take it slowly, get professional help to guide you and help you along the process, and that you listen to some of the things that Dr. Phil is saying, because I think that that core piece of intimacy and reconnecting around a healthy intimacy is essential. Now, going to your comment, Judah, is that's what it's all about, is we hide in many different ways. And people in AA or the 12-step hide connection sometimes through what I call the recovery persona. I can quote the literature, I can do all that stuff, but I don't know how to connect with you other than that. And so,
in fact, they become dependent on it.
Absolutely.
And it saves them for a while.
Absolutely.
There's some like those AA gurus who are out there for 30 years.
There's an
that's
element
their only coping skill.
There's an element of acculturation that you need to truly immerse yourself in the ideas and the beliefs of that system. But to the extent that it becomes your identity can be very challenging. And I've seen a lot of my friends and men that I've known and women struggle with that. And so when it comes to men and women who are in recovery together, what you said, I think, is right on. You have to have your life, the couple life, you know, the relationship, and then you have to have something outside of that as well. I mean, so when people do that, it's got much more to do with what is not happening in the relationship than their recovery.
I think that people's fear about that, though, is trust issues. Right? This idea that someone could have a separate life, that they don't disclose everything,
right,
and yet you're in a relationship, and how do you trust your partner, especially if you come from a fractured relationship?
Yeah.
Well, to quote my therapist,
welcome to recovery.
I mean, I've tried to be supportive, and I was, you know, expressed, you know, happiness that he was getting involved with AA, but, you know, I had to deal with my own private feelings that I'm like, I'm pissed.
And Heather, listen, we got to run, but Heather, I want to tell you, you're doing great, and I want to hear from you again, hopefully next week if you're not on vacation. But here's the thing. The fact that you're talking about this stuff is the whole reason we do this show, because what you're talking about, Heather, takes so much strength and so much courage that you're walking through this stuff. Most people, Heather, when they're going through what you're going through, run. You know, or they drink,
or isolate,
or they develop a process addiction.
Just start another relationship.
Yeah, you're walking through this like a person. And Heather, because of that, Dan and Dr. Phil are both going to send you signed copies of their books. And
awesome.
And I decided that for them. Heather, we will talk.
And by the way, I never got my anniversary gift.
That's in the mail. So please, all three of them will come. Heather's getting a hoodie from KLEAN Radio.
Great. Thank you.
Heather and Brian, get the stuff. Okay, we'll talk to you in a bit, Heather.
Bye.
Bye-bye. If you just tuned in, you're listening to KLEAN Radio. That's KLEAN with a K. We're running out of time, but the number is 800-222-5222. That's 800-222-5222. We're in the studio tonight with amazing guests, Dr. Phil Hemphill, and PhD. And just, it's got a lot of stuff to his title and PhD. But where are you right now?
Right now,
I know you're in the studio. I knew you were going to say that because you're friends with Andrew. Right. So I knew that was coming.
I really want to answer your question earlier. Okay. Enough about me. I think your question is really good about where do we draw the line? What are the limits in our lives? Where are the boundaries in our, we've become so comfortable just having this openness in all these different areas of our lives. So as Dan was talking about, whatever happened to when you come home from work, just saying, how's your day been? That was sort of the suggestion about how's your day been? It just sort of, I don't want to know the details about your day, okay? I don't care what, the reality of what some of the struggles were, the specificity. But if it was challenging, I'm here for you right now. Today. I don't need to know all the ins and outs. Just like, I'm not going to necessarily share all the ins and outs. And some things may bother or raise to a level of needing support, but we really do need to work at that, to have boundaries and to have certain people who we can turn to and feel like we can be open with them. We don't have to suffer in silence. Right. And we don't have to just put those out all over social media or put those out, because it gets too... We don't have a sense of ourselves.
And plus, you can't take it back.
No.
I've seen people post stuff, and then afterwards they go, "We're back together." And I want to say, did you see what you've been writing for the past 3 days?
What about my retweet?
Yeah, it just doesn't vanish. And I love what you're talking about because, one of the things about a relationship is everybody thinks you have to all have the same stuff you enjoy doing. And it's like my girlfriend loves food. I don't. So I say, go with your friend. Go eat. Have a good meal together. Enjoy yourselves. You enjoy dancing. Go dance. I don't. And some stuff.
What do you enjoy together?
I don't know. No, I'm joking. We enjoy everything together. And she's actually shown me some great movies lately. Great movie I encourage all our fans out there to watch is a movie called Short Term 12, which deals with the foster care system. An absolutely brilliant movie. And because I said yes, my first thing when she said to me, "Hey, let's go to that movie," I was like, why would I want to go to an independent movie? If the budget's not $50 million or above, the Judah's not there. And I went, and it was brilliant. So I want to get back to you, Dan, also, because how was it when you wrote this book? I know a lot of times, especially Andrew and I have been doing this show, we encounter sometimes people from the 12-step world that don't always exactly love that we do certain things, and they get a little angry. How did you find when you wrote this book, dealing with the 12 steps, did you get a little pushback from people in the...
Well, let me qualify by saying I'm a founding member of Faces and Voices. I'm in the movie The Anonymous People, and I've studied the tradition. Yeah. So there's a difference. Because a lot of people, really what we're having when people push back and react so much is, one, people who don't know the history. They don't understand the concepts behind the traditions.
What anonymity is.
But more than anything, I think it's a shame-based reaction.
Yeah.
It's a shame-based reaction that immediately throws up this guard, as opposed this defensiveness, the reaction, as opposed to sitting with it and saying what is difficult about this for me? Why am I having a hard time with this? I've had people accuse me of trying to rewrite the 12 and 12 or trying to replace, and I said, you know what? Look, I am a devout, member of the 12-step community.
Yeah.
And if you know me, you know that. And what I also believe, and what also the recovery literature says, is we know only a little. More and more is being revealed to us. And that message at the very end of the first 164 pages of the big book, I think that says something. And people who don't recognize the wisdom that Bill had in saying, you know what? This is going to evolve.
Right.
This is going to grow. This is not the end-all and the be-all. The fundamentalists are the people who are scared, the people who have trauma.
It's almost a paranoia. I think they take that line in a paranoid state, and it's like more will be revealed, and I'm paranoid about what I'm going to find out.
But that's
and it's all about how all these people are screwed
alcoholic
up.
rapture.
Yeah. It is almost biblical.
I call
and
them
it's like-
metaphobes always. You know, it's the people that need to be on meds that are screaming at everybody not to be on meds.
That's exactly right.
You know, they're all the ones. And what fascinates me is because I'm like you. I'm a devout, I'm a big, 12 steps saved my life. But I'm always to people, and Andrew and I have discussed this, read the book.
Right.
You know, because in the book this
read
says,
the history.
Right. This
read the
says
history
this
of the
might not
book.
be enough.
Yeah.
You know, they encourage you to seek outside sources,
Right.
and I love how sometimes that it's Bill Wilson tried LSD. We know that.
Yeah.
You know, we know
more
that he
than
tried for his depression.
He also appears to have had an untreated sex addiction.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
Nobody wants to talk about that.
But that's okay. It doesn't mean that what his writings and teachings are. And I love that in our society we
Brilliant
become
man.
that. You know, it's like, oh, they did one thing wrong. We can't listen to anything else they say.
Right.
And
No, I mean that's the beauty of recovery, is that it is imperfect, wounded people trying to find our way in this path of redemption and trying to just have a healthy life. And I think, like Phil was saying, and be something bigger than ourselves. Be a part of community. Try to create a healthier world. And I think that's what we're all trying to do. And those people who react to that, they're scared, and I try to have compassion for them. I try to actually use the literature and say, here's a sick person. How can I be helpful?
Yeah. That's amazing stuff, guys. We're running out of time.
It's a great show.
Yeah, this is like, I feel like I'm on that first date, and I want to ask you guys out again for the second date. So I want you guys to let me know if you're ever in town again. Listen, I'll push people away if I have them booked.
Can I say just one or two comments before we end? Okay, so about my book, Taming Disruptive Behavior. First off, to say where I started the book was probably 21 years ago when I met Andrew Spanswick, okay? And that was a little disruptive. He was a bit disruptive in our experience. But it really isn't a book about the 12 steps. It's really about dealing with behavioral issues in the workplace and working with healthcare workers to lower patient errors and increase morale in organizations.
How do people get your book?
You can go on Barnes & Noble, you can go on Amazon, and you go to American College of Physician Executives website and order it right there.
So pretty much everywhere that sells books, you could get Dr. Phil Hemphill's book.
And Dan, where do you get your book?
Same deal. You can also go to my website, dangriffin.com, and I just love to have people check it out, get my blog, react to the stuff that I'm putting out there.
And Judah's buying 2 copies.
Yeah,
so that he can mail them to everybody. Promised.
Thank you, Andrew, for buying them for me so I can buy them for somebody else. You're a very kind soul, Andrew. And listen, so we're talking about stuff tonight to the people out there listening and are going to listen to it when they go to KLEANradio.com or Facebook/KLEAN Radio, and they're going to listen to the show and go, how do I get help? And because this is so scary to talk about. So give us a call. The number is 888-601-6040. That's 888-601-6040. It's an absolute free call. I promise you it'll change your life. Go to read these men's books, because I probably have had my girlfriend read it for me out loud, and because I'm going to enjoy it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Continues
Thanks
at
for having us.
KLEANradio.com.
Are you or someone you care about addicted to drugs or alcohol? Addiction ruins lives and destroys families. Bring an end to the pain and suffering by calling KLEAN Treatment Centers. KLEAN has helped people from around the world break free by not only treating the addiction, but the underlying causes and providing vital aftercare so people can get clean and stay clean with no gimmicks and no false promises. If you need immediate assistance or just have questions, call KLEAN Treatment Centers for guidance. A much better life awaits.